Question 1. Implementation of advising a client in Nova Scotia on real estate investment trusts. Rate presents a unique challenge for a licensed real estate salesperson. Considering the regulatory framework governing real estate professionals in Nova Scotia, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional obligations and legal boundaries? Option A. Explain that rate are securities that trade on stock exchanges, are not direct property purchases, and strongly advise the client to consult a licensed financial advisor for investment decisions. Option B. Inform the client that rate are a complex investment outside the scope of real estate sales and that they should seek advice from any source other than a licensed financial advisor. Option C. Emphasize the guaranteed profitability of rate due to their real estate backing and suggest specific rate that are performing well in the current market. Option D. Describe rate as a direct way to invest in real estate, similar to buying a property, and offer to help the client find and purchase rate units as part of their real estate portfolio. Correct answer is A. Explain that rate are securities that trade on stock exchanges, are not direct property purchases, and strongly advise the client to consult a licensed financial advisor for investment decisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson by requiring them to advise a client on an investment vehicle that is not a direct real estate transaction, but is closely related. The salesperson must navigate the boundaries of their licensing and expertise, ensuring they provide accurate, ethical, and legally compliant information without overstepping their professional scope. Misrepresenting the nature of a rate or providing investment advice beyond their purview could lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including disciplinary action from the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission, NSREC. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and accurately explaining what a real estate investment trust rate is, emphasizing that it is a security that trades on stock exchanges, similar to stocks or bonds, and is not a direct purchase of physical property. The salesperson should highlight that while rate invest in income-generating real estate, purchasing units in a rate is an investment in a company that owns and operates these properties, not a direct ownership stake in any specific property. Crucially, the salesperson must advise the client that any decisions regarding the purchase of rate units constitute investment advice, which falls outside the scope of their real estate salesperson license in Nova Scotia. They should strongly recommend that the client consult with a licensed financial advisor or investment dealer for personalized investment recommendations and further due diligence. This approach adheres to the NSREC regulations regarding the scope of practice for licensed real estate professionals and upholds ethical obligations to avoid providing advice outside of one's expertise. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the client that purchasing rate units is essentially the same as buying a piece of property, and that the salesperson can facilitate the transaction as they would with a traditional real estate purchase, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This misrepresents the nature of rate and the salesperson's licensing authority. It also constitutes providing unlicensed investment advice, which is a direct violation of securities regulations and NSREC rules. Suggesting that rate are a guaranteed way to profit from real estate without mentioning the inherent risks associated with market fluctuations and the specific performance of the rate underlying assets is another failure. Real estate investments, including rate, carry risks, and failing to disclose these risks is misleading and unethical. Furthermore, implying guaranteed returns is a form of misrepresentation. Recommending specific rate based on perceived market trends or personal opinion without the client first consulting a licensed financial advisor is also a serious breach. This is direct investment advice, which the salesperson is not licensed to provide. It exposes both the salesperson and the client to potential financial harm and regulatory penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia must operate within the strict confines of their licensing and expertise. When faced with a client inquiry that touches upon areas outside their regulated scope, such as investment securities like rate, the decision-making process should prioritize client protection and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the core of the client's request and understanding its implications. 2. Determining if the request falls within the salesperson's licensed activities and expertise. 3. If it does not, clearly and accurately educating the client about the nature of the product or service. 4. explicitly stating the limitations of the salesperson's license and expertise. 5. Recommending consultation with appropriately licensed professionals for advice within those specialized areas. 6. Documenting all interactions and advice provided. Question 2. To address the challenge of a client in Nova Scotia seeking rapid financing for an investment property, which approach best demonstrates professional responsibility when discussing hard money loans and seller financing? Option A. Thoroughly explain the terms, risks, and benefits of both hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing the need for the client to seek independent legal and financial advice from Nova Scotia professionals before proceeding. Option B. Recommend hard money loans as the quickest solution, highlighting the speed of closing while omitting detailed discussion of their higher interest rates and shorter repayment terms. Option C. Focus on the potential for quick acquisition through hard money loans, suggesting that the client can manage the associated costs and risks without needing external professional advice. Option D. Advise the client that seller financing is always the most advantageous option for investors in Nova Scotia due to its flexibility, without detailing potential drawbacks. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly explain the terms, risks, and benefits of both hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing the need for the client to seek independent legal and financial advice from Nova Scotia professionals before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nova Scotia real estate salesperson because it involves advising a client on complex financing options that carry significant risks. The salesperson must navigate the client's financial needs and risk tolerance while adhering to the ethical obligations and regulatory requirements set forth by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission, NSREC. Misrepresenting or failing to adequately explain the implications of these financing methods can lead to severe financial harm for the client and professional repercussions for the salesperson. The salesperson's duty is to act in the client's best interest, which includes providing accurate, unbiased information about all viable options, even those that might be less conventional. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly educating the client about both hard money loans and seller financing, detailing the specific terms, risks, and benefits of each within the Nova Scotia context. This includes explaining the higher interest rates and shorter repayment terms typical of hard money loans, and the potential for negotiation and flexibility with seller financing. Crucially, the salesperson must emphasize that these are specialized financing tools and strongly recommend that the client seek independent legal and financial advice from qualified professionals in Nova Scotia before committing to any agreement. This approach aligns with the NSREC Code of Ethics, which mandates that registrants provide competent service, act honestly and with integrity, and disclose all material facts. Recommending independent professional advice is a cornerstone of responsible practice when dealing with complex financial arrangements that fall outside standard mortgage financing. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending only hard money loans without a comprehensive explanation of their risks and without suggesting independent legal and financial advice is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to meet the duty of care and may be seen as pushing a potentially predatory financing option without ensuring the client fully understands the implications, such as the high costs and rapid repayment demands, which could lead to foreclosure. Suggesting only seller financing as a universally beneficial option without detailing its potential drawbacks, such as the seller retaining control or the terms being less favorable than market rates, is also problematic. This selective presentation omits crucial information and does not fully serve the client's best interest by presenting a balanced view. Focusing solely on the speed of closing with hard money loans, while downplaying the associated costs and risks, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. The NSREC requires registrants to disclose all material facts, and the high cost and risk profile of hard money loans are undeniably material. This approach prioritizes transaction speed over client protection. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia should adopt a client-centric decision-making process. This involves first understanding the client's specific investment goals, financial situation, and risk tolerance. Then, the salesperson must research and present all relevant financing options available in Nova Scotia, including conventional mortgages, hard money loans, and seller financing. For each option, a clear, unbiased explanation of terms, costs, benefits, and risks must be provided. A critical step is to strongly advise the client to consult with independent legal counsel and financial advisors in Nova Scotia to review any proposed financing agreements. This ensures the client makes an informed decision based on comprehensive advice, thereby fulfilling the salesperson's fiduciary duty and adhering to NSREC regulations. Question 3. Examination of the data shows a unique residential property in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has recently undergone significant, high-quality renovations and features a distinctive architectural style. Which property valuation method would a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson most appropriately utilize to determine a fair market value for this property, considering the available market information? Option A. A combination of all three approaches without specific justification for each. Option B. Comparative market analysis. Option C. Income approach. Option D. Cost approach. The correct answer is B. Comparative market analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson because it requires them to select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property type, balancing the needs of the client with regulatory compliance and ethical practice. The salesperson must demonstrate a nuanced understanding of different valuation approaches and their applicability, avoiding oversimplification or the use of methods that could lead to misrepresentation or client dissatisfaction. The challenge lies in accurately reflecting the property's true market value in a way that is defensible and aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act and its associated regulations. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this situation is the comparative market analysis. This method is best suited for residential properties, especially those that are unique or have limited comparable sales data, as it focuses on what similar properties have recently sold for in the same or a very similar market. For a property with recent renovations and a unique architectural style, a comparative market analysis allows the salesperson to identify the closest comparable sales and make necessary adjustments for the differences, such as the quality of renovations and architectural features. This aligns with the ethical obligation under the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act to provide competent service and accurate information to clients. The Act emphasizes the importance of due diligence and providing advice based on current market conditions and relevant data. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading. This method is primarily used for income-generating properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces, where the value is derived from the potential rental income. A residential property, even if it has the potential for rental, is not typically valued based solely on its income-generating capacity in the Nova Scotia residential market. Relying on this method would fail to account for the property's intrinsic value as a residence and the specific market demand for its unique features, potentially leading to an inaccurate valuation and a breach of the duty of care owed to the client. The cost approach, which estimates the cost to replace or reproduce the property, is also not the best fit here. While it can be useful for newer construction or special-purpose properties where comparables are scarce, it often overestimates the value of older properties or those with unique architectural styles that may not be replicable at a reasonable cost. Furthermore, it doesn't directly reflect current market demand or buyer preferences, which are crucial for a property with recent renovations and a distinct style. Applying this method without significant adjustments for depreciation and market obsolescence would likely result in an inflated or inaccurate valuation, failing to meet the professional standards expected of a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia should approach property valuation by first understanding the primary purpose of the valuation and the type of property. For residential properties, the comparative market analysis is generally the starting point. They should then gather data on recent sales of similar properties, making careful adjustments for differences in location, size, features, condition, and any unique attributes. If comparable sales are scarce, they should consider the limitations of other approaches and how they might be used as supplementary tools rather than primary methods, always ensuring that the chosen method is defensible and transparent to the client. Ethical practice dictates that the salesperson must be able to explain their valuation methodology clearly and justify how it reflects the current market value, adhering to the principles of competence and client representation as outlined in the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act. Question 4. Research into the needs of a couple purchasing a property in Halifax, Nova Scotia, reveals they are interested in ensuring the surviving spouse automatically inherits the entire property upon the death of the first spouse, and they also want the flexibility to sell the property individually if needed. Considering the types of ownership available under Nova Scotia property law, which of the following best describes the ownership structure that would most closely align with their stated desires, while also acknowledging the inherent limitations of each? Option A. Joint tenancy, as it provides the right of survivorship, but the ability to sell individually would require the consent of the other joint tenant. Option B. Leasehold, as it grants the right to occupy and use the property for a defined period, but does not involve outright ownership or the typical considerations of inheritance. Option C. Tenancy in common, as it allows for individual shares and the ability to will those shares to others, but does not automatically pass the deceased share to the survivor. Option D. Fee simple, as it grants absolute ownership without specific co-ownership considerations, but does not inherently address survivorship or individual sale limitations. Correct answer is A. Joint tenancy, as it provides the right of survivorship, but the ability to sell individually would require the consent of the other joint tenant. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia to navigate the complexities of different ownership types and advise a client accurately, ensuring the client's understanding aligns with legal realities and their personal circumstances. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting ownership types can lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for the client, and professional repercussions for the salesperson. Careful judgment is required to identify the client's true intentions and explain the implications of each ownership structure under Nova Scotia law. The best professional approach involves clearly explaining the distinctions between fee simple, leasehold, joint tenancy, and tenancy in common, using plain language, and then guiding the client to consider which structure best suits their stated goals and family situation. This salesperson should actively listen to the client's desires regarding inheritance, control, and future sale of the property. They must then explain how each ownership type, as recognized under Nova Scotia property law, would facilitate or hinder those goals. For example, explaining that joint tenancy includes the right of survivorship, meaning the surviving owner automatically inherits the deceased owner's share, is crucial if the clients express a desire for seamless transfer to each other. Conversely, tenancy in common allows for individual shares to be willed to different beneficiaries, which is important if they have children from previous relationships. Salesperson's role is to educate, not to advise on which is best for them, but to explain the legal consequences of each so the clients can make an informed decision, ideally with legal counsel. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest and provide accurate information. An incorrect approach would be to assume the client's preferred ownership structure based on their marital status or age without a thorough discussion of their intentions. For instance, if the salesperson assumes that a married couple automatically wants joint tenancy and proceeds to explain only that option, they fail to explore other possibilities that might be more suitable for the client's specific estate planning needs or financial arrangements. This is a regulatory failure as it does not ensure the client is fully informed of all relevant ownership types and their implications under Nova Scotia law. Another incorrect approach is to provide a superficial overview of each ownership type without delving into the practical implications for the client's specific situation. Simply defining fee simple, leasehold, joint tenancy, and tenancy in common without connecting them to how property is managed, sold, or inherited in Nova Scotia would be a failure to provide adequate service. This could lead the clients to choose an ownership structure that does not meet their needs, potentially causing future complications. A third incorrect approach would be to recommend a specific ownership type to the clients, implying it is the best choice for them. Real estate salespeople are not qualified to provide legal or financial advice. Recommending a particular ownership structure over others constitutes practicing law without a license and is a serious ethical and regulatory breach. The salesperson's duty is to present the options and their consequences, empowering the clients to make their own informed decision, ideally after consulting with a lawyer. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Active listening and needs assessment. Understand the client's goals, concerns, and family dynamics. 2. Comprehensive education. Clearly and accurately explain all relevant ownership types under Nova Scotia law, focusing on their legal and practical implications. 3. Facilitate informed decision-making. Guide the client to consider how each ownership type aligns with their stated goals without making recommendations. 4. Encourage professional consultation. Advise clients to seek legal counsel for personalized advice on choosing the most appropriate ownership structure. 5. Documentation. Keep records of discussions and information provided to the client. Question 5. Which approach would be most prudent for a real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia when marketing a property that is adjacent to a former industrial site, and there are rumors of potential soil contamination, to ensure compliance with provincial regulations and ethical obligations? Option A. Advise the seller of their duty to disclose any known environmental issues and recommend obtaining professional environmental assessments, ensuring all findings are disclosed to potential buyers. Option B. Downplay the rumors of contamination to facilitate a quicker sale, assuming the buyer will conduct their own environmental checks. Option C. Rely on the absence of visible signs of contamination and proceed with marketing the property without further investigation. Option D. Inform potential buyers that environmental concerns are solely their responsibility to investigate and disclose any findings. The correct answer is A. Advise the seller of their duty to disclose any known environmental issues and recommend obtaining professional environmental assessments, ensuring all findings are disclosed to potential buyers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia to navigate potential environmental concerns that could significantly impact a property's value and marketability, while also adhering to their fiduciary duties to the client and provincial disclosure requirements. Balancing the client's desire for a quick sale with the ethical and legal obligation to disclose known material latent defects, including environmental issues, is paramount. Failure to do so can lead to legal repercussions, loss of commission, and damage to professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying and disclosing potential environmental concerns to the buyer, while also advising the seller on their disclosure obligations under Nova Scotia's Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations. This approach prioritizes transparency and compliance. Specifically, a salesperson should inform the seller of their duty to disclose any known environmental issues that could affect the property's use or value. They should then recommend that the seller obtain professional environmental assessments if there is any suspicion of contamination, and ensure that all findings, whether positive or negative, are fully disclosed to prospective buyers in writing. This aligns with the principle of acting honestly and in good faith, and fulfilling the duty to disclose material latent defects as required by Nova Scotia real estate law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to downplay or ignore potential environmental issues to facilitate a faster sale. This is ethically unsound and violates the salesperson's duty of disclosure under Nova Scotia's Real Estate Trading Act, can lead to the buyer discovering the issue post-purchase, resulting in litigation, rescission of the sale, and significant financial penalties for both the seller and the salesperson. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the absence of obvious signs means no environmental issues exist. Environmental contamination is often not visually apparent. Relying on assumptions without due diligence or professional assessment is a failure to exercise reasonable care and skill, which is a cornerstone of professional conduct for real estate licensees in Nova Scotia. This can lead to the salesperson being held liable for misrepresentation or failure to disclose material facts. A third incorrect approach is to place the entire burden of environmental investigation solely on the buyer. While buyers are expected to conduct their own due diligence, the salesperson and seller have a positive obligation to disclose known material latent defects. Shifting responsibility entirely to the buyer without fulfilling the seller's disclosure obligations is a dereliction of duty and can lead to legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia should adopt a proactive and transparent approach when dealing with potential environmental concerns. This involves understanding the seller's disclosure obligations under provincial legislation, advising the seller on obtaining professional assessments when necessary, and ensuring all material information is disclosed in writing to potential buyers. A systematic process of inquiry, documentation, and disclosure guided by legal and ethical principles, is crucial for protecting all parties involved and maintaining professional integrity. Question 6. The performance metrics show a consistent interest from clients in acquiring properties for investment purposes, with some clients expressing a desire to operate small businesses from their purchased locations. A salesperson in Nova Scotia is presented with a property that has a large detached dwelling and several outbuildings on several acres of land. The property is currently zoned for agricultural use, but the seller has indicated that the outbuildings could be easily converted for light industrial purposes or used for retail operations. The salesperson needs to advise the client on the most appropriate classification of this property for their stated investment and business intentions. Option A. Advise the client that based on the current zoning and the potential for conversion, the property could be considered for commercial or industrial purposes, but emphasize the need for the client to verify zoning changes and obtain necessary permits before proceeding with any business operations. Option B. Suggest the property is best suited for industrial use due to the outbuildings, and advise the client to proceed with business plans, assuming the necessary zoning adjustments will be straightforward to obtain. Option C. Recommend the property as primarily residential, given the presence of the detached dwelling, and suggest the client explore any business opportunities as a secondary consideration after the primary residential use is established. Option D. Classify the property strictly as agricultural, as per its current zoning, and inform the client that any business operations would require a separate property acquisition or significant rezoning efforts, without exploring conversion possibilities. The correct answer is A. Advise the client that based on the current zoning and the potential for conversion, the property could be considered for commercial or industrial purposes, but emphasize the need for the client to verify zoning changes and obtain necessary permits before proceeding with any business operations. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the salesperson to accurately identify and advise on the most suitable type of real estate for a client's specific needs and investment goals, while adhering to the regulatory framework governing real estate transactions in Nova Scotia. Misclassifying property types can lead to significant financial and legal repercussions for both the client and the salesperson, potentially violating the Real Estate Trading Act, RETA, and its associated regulations, as well as the Code of Ethics for Real Estate Professionals in Nova Scotia. Careful judgment is required to ensure the advice provided is informed, ethical, and compliant. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of the client's stated objectives, and then matching those objectives to the characteristics and typical uses of different real estate types as defined within the Nova Scotia context. This means actively listening to the client, asking clarifying questions about their intended use, investment horizon, and risk tolerance, and then providing guidance based on the fundamental distinctions between residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties. For instance, if a client expresses a desire to generate rental income from multiple units and operate a business from the premises, the salesperson would consider properties zoned for mixed use or specifically commercial. This approach prioritizes client needs and regulatory compliance by ensuring the property type aligns with both the client's intentions and the legal definitions and zoning regulations applicable in Nova Scotia. An incorrect approach would be to assume the client's needs based on superficial information, or to push a property type that is more familiar or profitable for the salesperson without proper due diligence. For example, recommending a large parcel of land solely because it is listed as agricultural, without confirming the client's intent to farm or engage in agricultural activities, or without verifying current agricultural zoning and potential restrictions, would be a failure. Similarly, advising a client to purchase a property for a business venture without considering commercial zoning, traffic flow, or accessibility requirements, and simply labeling it commercial based on its past use, would be a significant oversight. Another unprofessional approach would be to focus solely on the property's physical characteristics without considering the legal and regulatory implications of its classification, such as advising on a property for a small business without confirming its suitability for commercial operations under Nova Scotia's land use bylaws. These approaches fail to uphold the duty of care owed to the client and can lead to violations of RETA by providing inaccurate or incomplete advice. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, clearly define the client's objectives and constraints. Second, possess a comprehensive understanding of the different real estate classifications: residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and their defining characteristics and legal implications within Nova Scotia. Third, conduct thorough due diligence on any property being considered, including verifying zoning, permitted uses, and any relevant provincial or municipal regulations. Fourth, provide clear, accurate, and unbiased advice, ensuring the client understands the implications of their chosen property type. Finally, always act in the best interest of the client, adhering to ethical standards and regulatory requirements. Question 7. Strategic planning requires a clear understanding of fundamental concepts. In Nova Scotia, a real estate salesperson is discussing a potential listing with a seller who expresses a desire to simplify the property description for potential buyers, suggesting that the precise legal definition of real estate and its associated rights are not a significant detail. How should the salesperson best approach this situation to uphold their professional responsibilities? Option A. Clearly explain to the seller that the legal definition of real estate is a crucial aspect of the transaction and must be accurately represented to all potential buyers, as misrepresentation or omission is unethical and contrary to Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Option B. Focus solely on the seller's objective of a quick sale, prioritizing their financial interests over the precise legal definition of the property. Option C. Proceed with the sale without directly addressing the seller's request, assuming buyers will conduct their own due diligence regarding the property's definition. Option D. Agree to the seller's request and downplay the importance of the property's legal definition to potential buyers to facilitate a quicker sale. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain to the seller that the legal definition of real estate is a crucial aspect of the transaction and must be accurately represented to all potential buyers, as misrepresentation or omission is unethical and contrary to Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to balance the immediate financial interests of a seller with the long-term implications of their professional conduct and the integrity of the real estate market in Nova Scotia. Misrepresenting the importance of a property's definition can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, impacting the salesperson's license, reputation, and the buyer's trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties are acting on accurate information and within the bounds of Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and accurately defining the property's nature and its implications for potential buyers. This means explaining to the seller that the definition of real estate, as understood under Nova Scotia law, encompasses not just the physical land, but also any fixtures and rights associated with it. It is crucial to emphasize that misrepresenting or downplaying the significance of this definition to a buyer, even if the seller believes it is a minor detail, is unethical and potentially illegal. This approach ensures transparency, upholds the salesperson's fiduciary duty to the buyer once an agency relationship is established or implied, and aligns with the ethical obligations under the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, which mandate honest and fair dealings. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to the seller's request to downplay the importance of the property's definition to potential buyers. This directly violates the salesperson's duty of honesty and fair dealing. Failing to disclose material information or actively misleading a buyer about the nature of the property constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and regulatory requirements in Nova Scotia, potentially leading to disciplinary action by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale without addressing the seller's concern, assuming the buyer will discover the details themselves. This passive approach is also professionally unacceptable. A salesperson has a responsibility to ensure that all parties are operating with accurate information. Ignoring a seller's explicit instruction to mislead, while not actively misleading, still fails to uphold the salesperson's duty to facilitate a transaction based on full disclosure and understanding. This can still lead to issues if the buyer later discovers information that should have been proactively clarified. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the seller's desire for a quick sale without considering the legal definition of real estate and its impact on the buyer. While a salesperson represents the seller, this representation is not absolute and does not permit unethical or illegal actions. Prioritizing a quick sale over accurate representation and disclosure undermines the integrity of the transaction and the salesperson's professional obligations under Nova Scotia law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance above all else. When faced with a seller's request that conflicts with these principles, the salesperson must first understand the seller's motivation. Then, they must clearly explain the legal and ethical implications of the requested action, referencing relevant Nova Scotia legislation and professional standards. If the seller insists on an unethical course of action, the salesperson must refuse to participate and, if necessary, consider withdrawing from the representation, always acting in a manner that protects the integrity of the real estate profession and the public interest. Question 8. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia is working with a client who is concerned about recent interest rate hikes and their potential impact on the local housing market. The client believes property values will decline significantly and is hesitant to list their home. What is the most professional and ethically sound approach for the salesperson to take in this situation? Option A. Proactively educate the client about current economic factors influencing the Nova Scotia real estate market and explain how these might affect property values and buyer demand, empowering them to make informed decisions. Option B. Advise the client to wait indefinitely for market conditions to improve without providing any concrete analysis or alternative strategies. Option C. Focus solely on the client's emotional attachment to the property and downplay the impact of economic factors on its value. Option D. Dismiss the client's concerns about a potential market slowdown and assure them that prices will continue to rise regardless of economic indicators. The correct answer is A. Proactively educate the client about current economic factors influencing the Nova Scotia real estate market and explain how these might affect property values and buyer demand, empowering them to make informed decisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia to navigate the complexities of local market fluctuations and their impact on client expectations, while adhering to professional conduct and ethical obligations. The salesperson must balance providing accurate market insights with managing client emotions and ensuring informed decision-making, all within the framework of Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively educating the client about the current economic factors influencing the Nova Scotia real estate market, such as interest rate changes and local employment trends, and explaining how these might affect property values and buyer demand. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act's requirement for licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their clients. Providing comprehensive market education empowers the client to make realistic decisions based on current conditions, rather than solely on past performance or personal desires. It fosters transparency and builds trust, which are fundamental ethical obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns about a potential market slowdown and assure them that prices will continue to rise regardless of economic indicators. This is professionally unacceptable because it misrepresents the market, potentially leading the client to make a poor financial decision. It violates the duty of care and honesty owed to the client and could be seen as misleading conduct under Nova Scotia's real estate legislation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the client's emotional attachment to the property and downplay the impact of economic factors. While empathy is important, ignoring objective market realities is detrimental. This approach fails to provide the client with the necessary information to make an informed decision and could result in the client overvaluing their property or missing a critical selling window, thereby not acting in their best interest. A further incorrect approach is to advise the client to wait indefinitely for market conditions to improve without providing any concrete analysis or alternative strategies. This passive stance does not fulfill the salesperson's obligation to provide expert advice and guidance. It leaves the client in a state of uncertainty and does not actively work towards achieving their real estate goals, potentially breaching the duty to diligently represent the client's interests. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes client education and informed decision-making. This involves 1. Active listening to understand client concerns and expectations. 2. Gathering and analyzing relevant local market data and economic indicators specific to Nova Scotia. 3. Clearly and transparently communicating these findings to the client, explaining their potential impact. 4. Collaborating with the client to develop realistic strategies based on current market realities and their personal objectives. 5. Continuously monitoring market conditions and providing updated advice. This process ensures that advice is grounded in fact, ethically sound, and legally compliant with Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Question 9. The evaluation methodology shows that a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson is representing a seller who is experiencing significant financial difficulties and urgently needs to sell their property. The salesperson is aware of the seller's distress and the potential for a quick sale at a lower price. A potential buyer, also represented by the same salesperson, expresses interest in the property and is looking for a good deal. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the salesperson in Nova Scotia? Option A. Inform the seller that their financial situation may allow for a quick sale and advise them to consider offers that might be below market value due to their urgency, while also disclosing to the buyer that the seller is motivated by a need for a swift transaction, without revealing the specific nature of the seller's financial distress. Option B. Withhold information about the seller's financial motivation from the buyer, allowing the buyer to believe they are negotiating under standard market conditions. Option C. Advise the seller to accept the buyer's low offer immediately to resolve their financial issues quickly, without ensuring the seller fully understands the implications of selling below market value. Option D. Advise the buyer to submit a significantly low offer, leveraging the seller's known financial distress to secure a quick sale that benefits the buyer. The correct answer is A. Inform the seller that their financial situation may allow for a quick sale and advise them to consider offers that might be below market value due to their urgency, while also disclosing to the buyer that the seller is motivated by a need for a swift transaction, without revealing the specific nature of the seller's financial distress. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario presents a significant ethical challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson due to the inherent conflict of interest and the potential for misrepresentation. The salesperson is privy to confidential information about the seller's financial distress, which could be leveraged to their advantage or the buyer's, but doing so improperly violates fundamental duties owed to both parties and the public. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests while upholding professional standards and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing full and honest disclosure to all parties involved, as mandated by the Real Estate Trading Act, Nova Scotia, and its associated regulations, as well as the ethical codes of conduct for real estate professionals. This means informing the seller that their financial situation might influence negotiation strategies and advising them on the importance of obtaining independent financial advice. Simultaneously, it requires disclosing to potential buyers that the seller may be motivated by a need for a quick sale, without revealing the specific details of the seller's financial distress, thereby avoiding a breach of confidentiality and potential undue influence. This balanced disclosure ensures transparency, fairness, and compliance with the duty to act honestly and in good faith. An incorrect approach would be to exploit the seller's financial distress by advising the buyer to make a significantly low offer, knowing it would likely be accepted due to the seller's urgency. This action constitutes a breach of the salesperson's fiduciary duty to the seller, as it prioritizes the buyer's gain over the seller's best interests and potentially misleads the seller about the true market value. Another incorrect approach is to withhold information about the seller's motivation from the buyer, leading the buyer to believe they are negotiating under standard market conditions, which is a form of misrepresentation and a failure to act with integrity. Furthermore, advising the seller to accept a low offer without ensuring they understand the implications or have sought independent advice is also professionally negligent and unethical. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the ethical dilemma and potential conflicts of interest. This should be followed by a thorough review of relevant legislation, such as the Real Estate Trading Act, Nova Scotia, and professional codes of conduct. The next step is to consider the duties owed to all parties involved: the seller, the buyer, and the public. Seeking guidance from their brokerage's managing broker or legal counsel is a prudent step when faced with complex ethical situations. The ultimate decision must prioritize transparency, fairness, and compliance with all legal and ethical obligations, ensuring that all parties are making informed decisions. Question 10. The audit findings indicate that during a pre-listing inspection of a property in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, a licensed real estate salesperson discovered a significant structural issue in the foundation that was not previously disclosed by the seller. The seller, eager to sell quickly, suggests that the salesperson simply omit this detail from the property disclosure statement and assures the salesperson that they will have it repaired after closing, believing the buyer will not notice. The salesperson is aware that the cost of repairing this foundation issue is estimated to be $15,000. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Agree with the seller to omit the foundation issue from the property disclosure statement, assuring the seller that the buyer will likely not discover it and that the seller can address it post-closing. Option B. Downplay the severity of the foundation issue to the seller, suggesting it is a minor cosmetic problem that can be easily fixed after closing without the need for formal disclosure. Option C. Advise the seller to remove the damaged section of the foundation before the buyer's final walkthrough, suggesting that this will prevent the buyer from discovering the issue. Option D. Advise the seller that the structural issue is a material latent defect that must be disclosed to potential buyers on the property disclosure statement, and that failure to do so could result in legal repercussions for both the seller and the salesperson. The correct answer is D. Advise the seller that the structural issue is a material latent defect that must be disclosed to potential buyers on the property disclosure statement, and that failure to do so could result in legal repercussions for both the seller and the salesperson. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breach of professional conduct and contractual obligations, presenting a significant ethical and legal challenge for the salesperson. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the seller's desire to maximize profit with the buyer's right to a fair and transparent transaction, all within the strictures of Nova Scotia's real estate legislation and ethical guidelines. Misrepresenting property condition or failing to disclose material facts can lead to legal disputes, financial penalties, and damage to the salesperson's reputation and the brokerage standing. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests while upholding professional integrity. The best professional approach involves immediately and transparently communicating the discovered defect to the seller and advising them of their legal and ethical obligations to disclose this material fact to the potential buyer. This approach aligns with the principles of honesty, integrity, and fair dealing mandated by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, as well as the ethical standards expected of licensed real estate professionals. By proactively addressing the issue, the salesperson ensures compliance with disclosure requirements, protects the seller from future liability, and maintains the integrity of the transaction. This also allows for informed decision-making by the buyer, who can then adjust their offer or decide to proceed with the purchase with full knowledge. An approach that involves downplaying the significance of the defect to the seller, suggesting it can be easily fixed after closing without disclosure, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to uphold the duty of honesty and integrity. It actively conceals a material fact from the buyer, violating the disclosure obligations under Nova Scotia law and potentially leading to a breach of contract claim, misrepresentation, or even fraud. Such an action undermines the trust essential in real estate dealings. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to proceed with the sale without informing the seller of the defect and hoping the buyer does not discover it. This demonstrates a severe lack of professional responsibility and a disregard for legal and ethical duties. It places the seller at significant risk of litigation and financial loss, and it violates the salesperson's duty to act honestly and with reasonable care and skill. This passive concealment is as detrimental as active misrepresentation. Finally, advising the seller to simply remove the problematic item before the buyer's final walkthrough without disclosing its prior existence or the reason for its removal is also ethically and legally flawed. While it might temporarily obscure the issue, it does not negate the seller's obligation to disclose known material latent defects that are not readily observable. This action is a form of deception and fails to provide the buyer with complete and accurate information, thereby breaching disclosure requirements and potentially invalidating the sale or leading to post-closing disputes. The professional reasoning process for such situations should begin with identifying the material fact, the discovered defect. Next, the salesperson must consult their professional obligations under the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and the Real Estate Services Act, specifically focusing on duties of disclosure, honesty, and fair dealing. They should then communicate the findings and their legal implications to the seller, advising on the necessity of disclosure. The salesperson must document all communications and advice provided. If the seller refuses to disclose, the salesperson must consider their own ethical obligations, which may include withdrawing from the transaction if the non-disclosure is material and significant. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a property listed for sale in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, is located in an area where the municipal council is actively considering a zoning bylaw amendment that, if passed, would significantly restrict the type of commercial development permitted on the property. The seller is aware of this potential amendment, but has not disclosed it to their real estate salesperson, believing it is not yet a certainty and might not impact the sale price. The salesperson has learned about the potential amendment through a casual conversation with a municipal planner. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Inform prospective buyers in a general way that there is some discussion about zoning changes in the area without providing specific details about the potential amendment. Option B. Advise the seller that the potential zoning bylaw amendment is a material fact that should be disclosed to all prospective buyers, and recommend that the seller provide full details of the potential change. Option C. Suggest to the seller that they should wait to list the property until after the zoning amendment has been officially passed or rejected by the council. Option D. Proceed with marketing the property and selling it without mentioning the potential zoning change, as the amendment is not yet finalized and the seller has not explicitly instructed disclosure. The correct answer is B. Advise the seller that the potential zoning bylaw amendment is a material fact that should be disclosed to all prospective buyers, and recommend that the seller provide full details of the potential change. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate salesperson is privy to information that could significantly impact a property's value and marketability. But this information is not publicly disclosed or easily discoverable through standard due diligence. The salesperson must navigate the ethical obligation to their client, the seller, to maximize the sale price against the potential legal and ethical implications of withholding or selectively disclosing information that could affect a buyer's decision-making process. The salesperson's actions could lead to accusations of misrepresentation or failure to disclose material facts, jeopardizing their license and reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves advising the seller that the zoning bylaw amendment, if it significantly impacts the property's use or value, is a material fact that must be disclosed to potential buyers. This approach aligns with the principles of honesty, transparency, and fair dealing mandated by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations. Specifically, the Act requires registrants to disclose all material facts known to them that are not readily observable or known to the other party. By recommending full disclosure, the salesperson upholds their fiduciary duty to the seller, while also ensuring compliance with legal obligations and ethical standards, thereby protecting both parties and the integrity of the transaction. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale without informing the buyer about the potential zoning change, relying on the fact that the amendment is not yet finalized. This is ethically problematic and potentially illegal, because the salesperson has knowledge of a significant upcoming change that could materially affect the property's future use and value. Failing to disclose this known potential fact could be construed as a misrepresentation or a failure to disclose a material fact under Nova Scotia real estate law, even if the change is not yet official. Another incorrect approach is to suggest to the seller that they should wait for the zoning amendment to be finalized before listing the property, while seemingly protecting the seller by potentially allowing for a higher sale price. This approach can be seen as facilitating a deceptive practice. The salesperson's role is to facilitate a transaction based on current and known future conditions, not to manipulate the timing of a sale to exploit potential future changes without full disclosure to all parties involved. This could also be viewed as acting against the best interests of a buyer if the property is marketed without acknowledging the impending zoning shift. A further incorrect approach is to only mention the possibility of a zoning change in vague terms without providing specific details or advising the seller to disclose it. Vague statements can be easily misinterpreted or dismissed by buyers and do not fulfill the legal requirement for disclosing material facts. The salesperson has a duty to ensure that material information is clearly and accurately communicated, not obscured by ambiguity. This lack of specificity can lead to misunderstandings and potential legal challenges down the line. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves first identifying the nature of the information. Is it a material fact? If it is, the next step is to understand the legal and ethical obligations regarding its disclosure. In Nova Scotia, this means consulting the Real Estate Trading Act and its regulations. The salesperson should then communicate these obligations clearly to their client, the seller, and recommend the course of action that ensures full and transparent disclosure. If the client is resistant, the salesperson must reiterate their professional and legal duties, understanding that their license and reputation are at stake, and that facilitating a transaction that violates these principles is unacceptable. Question 12. Operational review demonstrates that a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson is representing a seller. During the listing period, the salesperson learns that a close personal friend is interested in purchasing the property and intends to make an offer. The salesperson has a personal incentive from their brokerage to close sales quickly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take in this situation? Adhering to Nova Scotia's Real Estate Trading Act. Option A. Inform the seller that they will be withdrawing from representing the seller due to a potential conflict of interest and advise them to find another agent. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship with the potential buyer to the seller and strongly recommend that the seller seek independent legal advice before proceeding with any offer from the friend. Option C. Proceed with negotiating the offer from the friend without mentioning the personal relationship, assuring the seller that the deal will be fair and beneficial. Option D. Negotiate the offer from the friend, but only after informing the seller that the salesperson has a personal incentive to close sales quickly. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship with the potential buyer to the seller and strongly recommend that the seller seek independent legal advice before proceeding with any offer from the friend. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a salesperson to navigate a potential conflict of interest while upholding their fiduciary duties to their client and adhering to the Real Estate Trading Act, Nova Scotia, and its associated regulations. The salesperson must balance their personal interest in a quick sale with the obligation to secure the best possible terms for their client. Careful judgment is required to ensure transparency and avoid any perception of impropriety. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the client and advising them to seek independent legal counsel. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the client's best interests and ensures they are fully informed of all relevant circumstances. The Real Estate Trading Act mandates that registrants act with honesty and integrity, and this includes full disclosure of any situation that might compromise their loyalty to a client. By recommending independent legal advice, the salesperson empowers the client to make an informed decision, free from any undue influence or perceived conflict on the part of the salesperson. This aligns with the ethical obligations of a real estate professional to act in the best interest of their client at all times. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with negotiating the offer without full disclosure, hoping to secure a quick sale. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the salesperson's fiduciary duty to their client. The Real Estate Trading Act requires registrants to avoid situations where their personal interests conflict with those of their client, and proceeding without disclosure is a direct contravention of this principle. It creates a situation where the salesperson may be motivated by their personal gain, e.g., a bonus for a quick sale, rather than solely by the client's objective to achieve the best possible outcome. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the buyer's relationship to the salesperson and proceed with the negotiation, assuring the client that it will not affect the deal. This is also professionally unacceptable, as it involves a misrepresentation of the potential for conflict. The Real Estate Trading Act emphasizes transparency and honesty. Failing to fully disclose the nature of the relationship and its potential implications, even if the salesperson believes it won't be an issue, undermines the client's trust and ability to make an informed decision. It can lead to accusations of bias and a breach of professional conduct. A final incorrect approach would be to withdraw from representing the seller entirely without advising them on their options or the implications of the situation. While withdrawing might seem like a way to avoid conflict, it could leave the client vulnerable and without proper guidance during a critical negotiation phase. The salesperson has a duty to act in the client's best interest, which includes providing appropriate advice and facilitating a smooth transaction, even if it means managing a potential conflict through disclosure and independent counsel. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with identifying any potential conflicts of interest. Once identified, the salesperson must assess the nature and severity of the conflict. The next step is to prioritize the client's best interests and legal obligations. This involves immediate and full disclosure to the client, explaining the situation clearly and transparently. Crucially, the salesperson should then advise the client to seek independent legal or professional advice to ensure their interests are protected and they can make an informed decision. Throughout this process, maintaining open communication and documentation is paramount. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal that a property manager in Nova Scotia has received a request from a landlord to significantly increase the rent for a long-term tenant upon lease renewal. The landlord believes the current rent is below market value and wants to maximize their return. The property manager is considering how to best advise the landlord and communicate with the tenant. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional standards and Nova Scotia's regulatory framework for property management and residential tenancies? Option A. Review the existing lease agreement and consult the Residential Tenancies Act of Nova Scotia to determine the legal parameters for rent increases, required notice periods, and any applicable regulations before advising the landlord and communicating with the tenant. Option B. Immediately inform the landlord that the rent increase can be implemented as requested to maximize their income, as the landlord has the right to set rental rates. Option C. Advise the landlord to present the tenant with a new lease agreement at the significantly higher rate, suggesting this is a way to bypass the standard rent increase procedures. Option D. Tell the tenant that the rent increase is mandatory and they must accept it to continue their tenancy, without referencing the lease or any specific Nova Scotia laws. Correct answer is A. Review the existing lease agreement and consult the Residential Tenancies Act of Nova Scotia to determine the legal parameters for rent increases, required notice periods, and any applicable regulations before advising the landlord and communicating with the tenant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the competing interests of a landlord seeking to maximize rental income and a tenant seeking to maintain their current living situation and avoid unexpected costs. The property manager's role as an intermediary necessitates adherence to ethical standards and the specific regulations governing property management in Nova Scotia to ensure fairness and transparency. Failure to do so can lead to disputes, legal action, and damage to professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the existing lease agreement and relevant Nova Scotia tenancy laws, specifically the Residential Tenancies Act. This approach prioritizes understanding the legal framework governing rent increases and tenant rights. The property manager should then communicate clearly and professionally with both the landlord and the tenant, outlining the legal parameters for rent adjustments, the notice period required, and any conditions that might permit or restrict an increase. This ensures that any proposed rent increase is legally compliant and that the tenant is fully informed of their rights and the landlord's intentions within the bounds of the law. This aligns with the ethical duty of a property manager to act with integrity and competence, upholding the principles of fairness and transparency as expected under Nova Scotia's real estate and tenancy regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately agreeing to the landlord's request for a significant rent increase without consulting the lease or relevant legislation. This fails to uphold the property manager's duty to act within legal boundaries and could lead to an illegal rent increase, violating the Residential Tenancies Act of Nova Scotia and potentially exposing the landlord to penalties. It also disregards the tenant's rights and the terms of their existing agreement. Another incorrect approach is to inform the tenant that the rent increase is non-negotiable and must be accepted, regardless of the lease terms or legal limits. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of tenancy laws and an unprofessional disregard for tenant rights. It bypasses the requirement for proper notice and adherence to any legally mandated limits on rent increases, creating an adversarial situation and potential breach of the Residential Tenancies Act. A third incorrect approach is to suggest to the landlord that they can circumvent the formal rent increase process by offering the tenant a new lease at a higher rate, implying this is a loophole. This is unethical and potentially illegal, as it attempts to bypass the protections afforded to tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act regarding rent adjustments. It misrepresents the legal framework and could lead to disputes and legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals in property management in Nova Scotia must adopt a decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the governing legislation, primarily the Residential Tenancies Act. This involves identifying the legal rights and obligations of both landlords and tenants concerning lease agreements and rent adjustments. When faced with a request like this, the first step is always to consult the existing lease and then cross-reference it with the current tenancy laws. Communication should be transparent, factual, and respectful, ensuring all parties are aware of their legal standing. If a proposed action, such as a rent increase, is not legally permissible or requires specific procedures, the property manager must advise accordingly, guiding the landlord towards compliant actions and informing the tenant of their rights in the process. This systematic approach ensures ethical conduct, legal compliance, and fosters trust among all parties involved. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson is assisting a client who is purchasing a residential property and is seeking to understand different mortgage financing options. Which of the following actions best reflects the salesperson's professional obligations and regulatory boundaries when explaining mortgage types? Option A. Focus the discussion primarily on the interest-only mortgage option, highlighting its potential for lower monthly payments without detailing the principal repayment structure. Option B. Advise the client that a fixed-rate mortgage is always the safest option because it provides payment certainty. Option C. Recommend an adjustable-rate mortgage, explaining that it typically offers lower initial payments which are often advantageous for first-time homebuyers. Option D. Clearly and accurately describe the core characteristics and implications of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, emphasizing that the client should consult with a mortgage broker or financial advisor for personalized recommendations. The correct answer is D. Clearly and accurately describe the core characteristics and implications of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, emphasizing that the client should consult with a mortgage broker or financial advisor for personalized recommendations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson because it requires them to accurately explain complex mortgage products to a client without providing financial advice. The salesperson must understand the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages to guide the client towards understanding their options, but must avoid recommending a specific product or implying expertise in financial planning. The challenge lies in balancing informative disclosure with the regulatory boundaries that prohibit unlicensed financial advice. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client is empowered with knowledge to make their own informed decision, rather than being influenced by the salesperson's potentially unqualified opinion. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and accurately describing the core characteristics and implications of each mortgage type, focusing on how they function and the general risks and benefits associated with each. This includes explaining that a fixed-rate mortgage offers predictable payments over its term. An adjustable-rate mortgage has payments that can fluctuate based on market interest rates, and an interest-only mortgage allows for lower initial payments that only cover interest, with the principal balance remaining unchanged until later in the loan term. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, which mandate that salespersons provide accurate information about property and related transactions. It respects the salesperson's role as an information provider, not a financial advisor, and empowers the client to seek professional financial counsel based on a foundational understanding of the mortgage products. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending a specific mortgage type based on the salesperson's personal opinion or perceived suitability for the client's situation is an incorrect approach. This constitutes providing financial advice, which falls outside the scope of a real estate salesperson's license and regulatory authority in Nova Scotia. Such an action could lead to misinformed decisions by the client and potential liability for the salesperson and their brokerage. Suggesting that one mortgage type is universally better than another without considering the client's unique financial circumstances and risk tolerance is also an incorrect approach. This oversimplifies complex financial decisions and can be misleading. The salesperson lacks the licensing and expertise to make such broad pronouncements, and it bypasses the crucial step of the client consulting with a qualified mortgage broker or financial planner, focusing solely on the initial payment amount of each mortgage type without explaining the long-term implications, such as potential payment increases with adjustable-rate mortgages or the principal repayment obligation with interest-only mortgages, is an incomplete and potentially deceptive approach. The selective disclosure fails to provide the client with a comprehensive understanding necessary for informed decision-making and could lead to future financial difficulties for the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia should adopt a framework that prioritizes accurate, unbiased information dissemination within their license scope. When discussing mortgage options, the process should involve 1. Understanding the client's general needs and property goals. 2. Providing clear, factual descriptions of available mortgage types, highlighting their fundamental mechanics and general implications. 3. Emphasizing the importance of consulting with licensed financial professionals, e.g., mortgage brokers, financial planners, for personalized advice and product recommendations. 4. Documenting the information provided and the recommendation to seek professional financial advice. This ensures compliance with regulations, protects the client, and maintains professional integrity. Question 15. Compliance review shows that a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson is assisting a buyer who is seeking financing for a property purchase. The buyer has expressed some confusion about the different types of mortgage products available and the process of obtaining a mortgage. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical practice? Option A. The salesperson assures the buyer that securing financing will be straightforward and downplays the need for a formal pre-approval process, suggesting they can finalize the mortgage after the offer is accepted. Option B. The salesperson explains the general types of mortgage products available, discusses the importance of obtaining mortgage pre-approval, and strongly recommends the buyer consult with a licensed mortgage broker or financial advisor to explore specific options tailored to their financial situation. Option C. The salesperson recommends a specific mortgage product from a lender with whom they have a pre-existing referral agreement, highlighting the benefits of that particular product without exploring other options. Option D. The salesperson provides detailed advice on specific interest rates, amortization periods, and mortgage insurance options, effectively acting as a mortgage advisor for the buyer. The correct answer is B. The salesperson explains the general types of mortgage products available, discusses the importance of obtaining mortgage pre-approval, and strongly recommends the buyer consult with a licensed mortgage broker or financial advisor to explore specific options tailored to their financial situation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate salesperson must navigate the complexities of financing options while ensuring they act in the best interest of their client and adhere to Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Misrepresenting financing options or failing to disclose material information can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. Careful judgment is required to provide accurate, unbiased advice. The best approach involves thoroughly understanding the client's financial situation and then presenting a range of suitable mortgage products from various lenders, emphasizing the importance of independent financial advice. This aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act, which mandates that salespersons act with honesty and integrity and disclose all material facts. By facilitating an informed decision based on the client's needs and encouraging professional financial consultation, the salesperson upholds their fiduciary duty and regulatory obligations. An incorrect approach would be to recommend a specific mortgage product based on a referral fee from a particular lender. This creates a conflict of interest, as the salesperson's recommendation may be influenced by personal gain rather than the client's best interests. Such an action could violate the duty of loyalty and could be seen as a breach of trust, potentially leading to disciplinary action under the Real Estate Trading Act for failing to act in the client's best interest and for undisclosed conflicts. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the importance of pre-approval or to suggest that a mortgage can be secured easily without proper financial assessment. This misrepresents the financing process and could lead the client into a transaction they cannot afford, violating the duty to provide accurate information and potentially leading to financial harm for the client. This also fails to uphold the standard of care expected of a licensed salesperson. A further incorrect approach is to provide detailed financial advice on mortgage terms and interest rates without being a licensed mortgage broker or financial advisor. While salespersons can discuss general financing concepts, offering specific advice on complex financial products can be construed as practicing mortgage brokering without a license, which is a violation of provincial regulations and could expose the salesperson and their brokerage to liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client needs and regulatory compliance. This involves active listening to understand the client's financial goals and limitations, educating them on the general financing process, and then directing them to qualified professionals, like mortgage brokers or financial advisors, for specific product recommendations and advice. Transparency about any potential referral arrangements is also crucial. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that a prospective buyer client who is pre-approved for a mortgage expresses concern about the specific terms and conditions of their mortgage offer and asks their Nova Scotia real estate salesperson for advice on whether it's a good deal and how to best proceed with finalizing the application. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Advise the client that as a real estate salesperson, their role is limited to the property transaction and recommend they consult with their mortgage lender or a licensed mortgage broker for advice on mortgage terms and the application process. Option B. Provide an opinion on the mortgage offer based on general market knowledge, stating whether the terms appear favorable and if the client is likely to be approved. Option C. Recommend a specific mortgage product or lender that the salesperson has had positive experiences with in the past, suggesting it might be a good option for the client. Option D. Offer to assist the client in filling out the mortgage application form, explaining that they can help ensure all the details are correctly entered to expedite the process. The correct answer is A. Advise the client that as a real estate salesperson, their role is limited to the property transaction and recommend they consult with their mortgage lender or a licensed mortgage broker for advice on mortgage terms and the application process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate salespersons in Nova Scotia, navigating the mortgage application process for a client while ensuring compliance with provincial real estate regulations and ethical obligations. The salesperson must balance assisting the client with their financing needs against the strict boundaries of their licensing, avoiding the unauthorized practice of mortgage brokering or providing financial advice beyond their scope. The professional challenge lies in offering helpful guidance without overstepping legal and ethical lines, which could lead to disciplinary action, financial penalties, or harm to the client. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves guiding the client to qualified and licensed professionals for mortgage advice and application. This means clearly advising the client that the salesperson's role is limited to real estate transactions and that they cannot provide mortgage advice or assist directly with the mortgage application beyond facilitating introductions. The salesperson should recommend that the client consult with a licensed mortgage broker or a financial institution. This approach aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, which define the scope of practice for licensed salespersons and prohibit them from engaging in activities reserved for other licensed professionals, such as mortgage brokering. Ethically, it prioritizes the client's best interests by ensuring they receive advice from appropriately qualified individuals. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a specific mortgage product or lender without disclosing any potential referral fees or conflicts of interest is problematic. This could be construed as providing financial advice or acting as an unlicensed mortgage broker, violating the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act. It also creates a potential conflict of interest if the salesperson receives compensation for the referral, which must be disclosed according to provincial disclosure requirements. Offering to help fill out the mortgage application form, even with the intention of assisting the client, crosses the line into providing services that require mortgage licensing. This action directly involves the salesperson in the mortgage application process beyond their permitted scope, potentially leading to errors or misrepresentations that could harm the client and violate regulatory requirements. Providing an opinion on the client's mortgage approval likelihood based on the salesperson's experience is also an overreach. While a salesperson might have general knowledge of the market, offering such opinions constitutes financial advice and could mislead the client, potentially impacting their decision-making regarding the property purchase. This falls outside the salesperson's licensed activities and could lead to liability if the client relies on this inaccurate assessment. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia must operate within the defined boundaries of their licensing. When a client requires services outside this scope, such as mortgage brokering or financial advice, the professional's duty is to refer the client to a qualified and licensed professional in that field. This involves clear communication about the salesperson's limitations and providing general guidance on where to seek appropriate assistance. A robust decision-making process includes identifying the client's needs, assessing whether those needs fall within the salesperson's licensed scope, and if not, making appropriate referrals while maintaining transparency and avoiding any appearance of providing unlicensed services. Question 17. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of deals closing faster when the salesperson proactively explains the nuances of private mortgage insurance, PMI, and its potential impact on a buyer's monthly payments in Nova Scotia, even though the salesperson is not licensed to provide financial advice. A potential buyer, who is pre-approved for a mortgage with a high-ratio loan, expresses concern about the additional cost of PMI. What is the most ethical and professionally responsible course of action for the Nova Scotia real estate salesperson? Option A. Suggest that the buyer explore alternative financing options that might avoid PMI altogether, even if those options are less common or potentially less favorable for the buyer in the long run, to alleviate their immediate concern. Option B. Explain that PMI is a lender requirement for high-ratio mortgages in Nova Scotia, typically paid by the borrower, and advise the buyer to consult with their mortgage broker or a financial advisor for detailed information on its implications and their specific mortgage options. Option C. Offer to research different PMI providers and present the buyer with a comparison of their costs and benefits, suggesting which option might be most financially advantageous for their situation. Option D. Assure the buyer that PMI is a minor cost that can often be absorbed into the mortgage payments without significant long-term financial strain, encouraging them to proceed with the purchase to secure the property. The correct answer is B. Explain that PMI is a lender requirement for high-ratio mortgages in Nova Scotia, typically paid by the borrower, and advise the buyer to consult with their mortgage broker or a financial advisor for detailed information on its implications and their specific mortgage options. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits a salesperson's desire to close a deal and earn a commission against their fundamental duty to act in the client's best interest and uphold ethical standards, particularly concerning financial advice related to mortgage insurance. The salesperson must navigate the complexities of private mortgage insurance, PMI, without overstepping their licensing boundaries or providing advice they are not qualified to give. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client receives accurate information and makes informed decisions without undue influence. The best professional approach involves clearly explaining the role of PMI as mandated by the lender and the Nova Scotia government's regulatory framework for real estate transactions. This includes advising the client that PMI is a requirement for high-ratio mortgages to protect the lender, not the borrower, and that the cost is typically passed on to the borrower. Crucially, the salesperson must then direct the client to seek independent financial and legal advice regarding the implications of PMI and their mortgage options. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the salesperson's licensing scope, which prohibits providing financial or mortgage advice. It prioritizes client education and empowers them to consult qualified professionals, thereby fulfilling the duty of care and ethical obligations under Nova Scotia real estate regulations. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of PMI or suggest ways to circumvent it without proper qualification. This is professionally unacceptable because it misrepresents the nature of PMI and potentially leads the client into a financially disadvantageous situation. It also constitutes providing unlicensed financial advice, a serious breach of regulatory compliance in Nova Scotia. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the commission earned from the sale, ignoring the client's financial well-being and the implications of PMI. This demonstrates a conflict of interest and a failure to prioritize the client's best interests, which is a core ethical requirement for real estate professionals in Nova Scotia. A further incorrect approach would be to provide a detailed explanation of mortgage insurance options and their comparative costs, effectively acting as a mortgage broker or financial advisor. This is professionally unacceptable as it exceeds the salesperson's licensing authority and could lead to the client making decisions based on incomplete or unqualified advice, potentially resulting in significant financial harm. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of one's licensing limitations. When a client's inquiry touches upon areas outside the salesperson's expertise, such as detailed financial planning or mortgage product comparisons, the salesperson's responsibility is to provide general information about the requirement or concept, and then strongly recommend consulting with qualified professionals like mortgage brokers, financial advisors, or legal counsel. Transparency about one's role and limitations is paramount. Question 18. The performance metrics show a property in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has experienced a significant increase in value over the past 2 years, and the client is eager to capitalize on this trend by selling quickly. However, your independent market analysis suggests that while the market has been strong, the recent surge may be nearing a plateau, and current rental income projections, while positive, are not as robust as the client anticipates. Considering your obligations as a licensed real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia, which of the following represents the most professional and ethical course of action? Option A. Advise the client that the market is too unpredictable to provide accurate projections and suggest they proceed with the sale based on their current optimistic outlook without further detailed analysis. Option B. Focus on highlighting the past 2 years of strong appreciation and the client's optimistic rental income projections in your marketing materials to attract buyers quickly, while downplaying any potential market slowdown. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the property's current market value, potential rental income, associated expenses, and projected appreciation based on current economic conditions and historical data specific to the Halifax market, and present this objective assessment to the client, including potential risks and a realistic timeline for sale. Option D. Immediately list the property at the price the client desires, based on their expectation of continued rapid appreciation, and assure them that the market will support this valuation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the property's current market value, potential rental income, associated expenses, and projected appreciation based on current economic conditions and historical data specific to the Halifax market, and present this objective assessment to the client, including potential risks and a realistic timeline for sale. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Nova Scotia to balance a client's desire for a quick profit with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and comprehensive investment advice. The salesperson must avoid misleading the client or engaging in practices that could be construed as promoting speculative or unrealistic returns, which could violate their duties under the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and the Real Estate Services Act. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the advice given is grounded in sound investment principles and reflects the realities of the Nova Scotia real estate market, rather than succumbing to client pressure for potentially unsustainable growth projections. The best professional approach involves conducting a thorough, objective analysis of the property's investment potential, considering both historical market data and current economic conditions in Nova Scotia. This includes evaluating factors such as rental income potential, vacancy rates, property taxes, maintenance costs, and projected appreciation based on realistic market trends. The salesperson should then present this comprehensive analysis to the client, clearly outlining potential risks and rewards, and advising on a strategy that aligns with prudent investment practices. This approach upholds the salesperson's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, ensuring transparency and informed decision-making, and adhering to the ethical standards expected of licensed professionals in Nova Scotia. An approach that focuses solely on the client's optimistic projection without independent verification is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct due diligence and provide objective advice could mislead the client into making a poor investment decision, potentially violating the salesperson's duty of care and honesty. Furthermore, presenting a skewed picture of potential returns, even if driven by client enthusiasm, could be seen as misrepresentation under Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the client's concerns about the property's performance and simply proceed with a sale based on the initial optimistic outlook. This demonstrates a lack of responsiveness to client needs and a failure to engage in a collaborative investment analysis. It neglects the salesperson's responsibility to address potential issues and provide guidance that mitigates risk, thereby failing to act in the client's best interest. Finally, an approach that involves exaggerating future market trends or rental income to meet the client's expectations is unethical and illegal. This constitutes a form of misrepresentation and could lead to significant financial harm for the client, resulting in disciplinary action by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission and potential legal liabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client well-being and ethical conduct. This involves actively listening to client goals, conducting independent and objective research, providing clear and transparent information about risks and rewards, and advising on strategies that are financially sound and compliant with all relevant Nova Scotia real estate laws and ethical guidelines. When client expectations diverge from realistic market analysis, the professional's role is to educate and guide, not to conform to unrealistic demands. Question 19. The efficiency study reveals that a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson is working with a client who is eager to sell their family home quickly and has suggested that the salesperson make the numbers look good to attract buyers. The salesperson is considering different valuation methods to present to the client. Which valuation method should the salesperson prioritize to ensure ethical and regulatory compliance while providing a realistic market assessment? Option A. A comparative market analysis based on recent sales of similar properties in the neighborhood. Option B. A subjective assessment based on the salesperson's personal opinion of the property's desirability. Option C. A cost approach, calculating the replacement cost of the property minus depreciation. Option D. An income approach, estimating the potential rental income the property could generate. The correct answer is A. A comparative market analysis based on recent sales of similar properties in the neighborhood. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential ethical dilemma for a Nova Scotia real estate salesperson. The challenge lies in balancing the client's desire for a quick sale with the salesperson's professional obligation to provide an accurate and defensible property valuation. Misrepresenting the property's value, even with the client's encouragement, can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including breaches of the Real Estate Trading Act, Nova Scotia, and its associated regulations, as well as the Nova Scotia Association of Realtors Registered Code of Ethics. The salesperson must exercise sound professional judgment to ensure their valuation methods are appropriate and transparent. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is to conduct a thorough comparative market analysis, CMA. CMA is the standard and most reliable method for residential property valuation in Nova Scotia. It involves analyzing recent sales of comparable properties in the immediate vicinity, adjusting for differences in features, condition, and location. This method is directly aligned with the principles of fair dealing and professional competence expected of licensed real estate professionals under Nova Scotia's regulatory framework. It provides an objective, data-driven estimate of market value that can be clearly explained to the client and any potential buyer. The Real Estate Trading Act emphasizes the importance of providing accurate information to clients and the public, and a CMA best fulfills this obligation. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading for a typical residential property. This method is primarily used for investment properties, where income generation is the primary driver of value. Applying it to a standard family home, which is not typically purchased for its rental income potential, would result in an irrelevant and inaccurate valuation. This could be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence and provide competent service, violating professional standards. Similarly, employing the cost approach would be an incorrect and unprofessional method for valuing this residential property. The cost approach estimates the cost to replace or reproduce the property, minus depreciation. While useful for unique properties, new construction, or insurance purposes, it is generally not reflective of market value for existing residential homes. Market participants typically do not purchase homes based on replacement cost. They base their decisions on what similar properties have sold for. Relying on this method would fail to accurately represent the property's market value and could lead to misrepresentation, a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Professionals should approach valuation by first understanding the property type and its intended market. For residential properties in Nova Scotia, the comparative market analysis is the industry standard and regulatory expectation. When a client expresses a desire for a specific outcome, e.g., a quick sale at a certain price, the salesperson's duty is to educate the client on realistic market values based on sound valuation principles, rather than manipulating the valuation process to meet the client's wishes. Transparency, objectivity, and adherence to established valuation methods are paramount. Question 20. The performance metrics show a significant increase in lead generation from online advertising campaigns, but the brokerage's marketing director is concerned that the current digital strategy for a new condominium development in Halifax, Nova Scotia, may not be reaching a diverse range of potential buyers. The marketing director has presented the following options for allocating the remaining $15,000 advertising budget for the next quarter, aiming to maximize reach while adhering to fair housing principles. A. Allocate the entire $15,000 to targeted social media advertising campaigns that utilize demographic segmentation to reach specific income brackets and lifestyle preferences, ensuring no explicit mention of protected characteristics. B. Divide the budget equally, allocating $7,500 to broad-reach television commercials and $7,500 to local community newspaper advertisements in affluent neighborhoods. C. Allocate $10,000 to a premium placement on a popular real estate listing website known for its high traffic among a specific, dominant demographic, and $5,000 to sponsored content on niche blogs catering to a similar demographic. D. Allocate $12,000 to a digital advertising campaign focused on general interest websites and $3,000 to print advertisements in a variety of local publications, including those in less affluent areas. Option A. Divide the budget equally, allocating $7,500 to broad-reach television commercials and $7,500 to local community newspaper advertisements in affluent neighborhoods. Option B. Allocate $10,000 to a premium placement on a popular real estate listing website known for its high traffic among a specific, dominant demographic, and $5,000 to sponsored content on niche blogs catering to a similar demographic. Option C. Allocate the entire $15,000 to targeted social media advertising campaigns that utilize demographic segmentation to reach specific income brackets and lifestyle preferences, ensuring no explicit mention of protected characteristics. Option D. Allocate $12,000 to a digital advertising campaign focused on general interest websites and $3,000 to print advertisements in a variety of local publications, including those in less affluent areas. The correct answer is C. Allocate the entire $15,000 to targeted social media advertising campaigns that utilize demographic segmentation to reach specific income brackets and lifestyle preferences, ensuring no explicit mention of protected characteristics. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a salesperson's desire to close a deal and their absolute legal and ethical obligation to uphold fair housing principles. The salesperson must exercise careful judgment to ensure their actions do not inadvertently perpetuate discrimination, even if the intent is not malicious. The pressure to meet performance metrics can exacerbate this challenge, making it crucial to prioritize legal compliance and ethical conduct over immediate sales goals. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential discriminatory impacts of marketing strategies, even when seemingly neutral. This means understanding that certain marketing choices, while not explicitly discriminatory, can have a disproportionately negative effect on protected groups. By analyzing the potential reach and perception of different marketing channels, a salesperson can make informed decisions that align with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act and the Real Estate Services Act. This approach is correct because it demonstrates a commitment to fair housing by actively seeking to prevent discrimination before it occurs, rather than reacting to it. It prioritizes inclusivity and equal opportunity in housing, which are fundamental tenets of both legal and ethical real estate practice in Nova Scotia. An incorrect approach involves relying solely on the absence of explicit discriminatory language in marketing materials. This fails to recognize that discrimination can be indirect and unintentional. For example, targeting marketing efforts exclusively towards demographics that do not include protected groups, even without explicitly excluding them, can be considered discriminatory under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. This approach is ethically and legally deficient because it overlooks the broader impact of marketing decisions. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize marketing channels that are perceived to be more cost-effective or efficient, without considering their potential to exclude or disadvantage protected groups. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence in ensuring fair housing. The Real Estate Services Act requires registrants to act with integrity and in the best interests of the public, which includes ensuring equitable access to housing opportunities. Focusing solely on cost without considering the fair housing implications is a failure to meet this standard. A further incorrect approach is to assume that if a client requests a specific marketing strategy that might have discriminatory effects, the salesperson is absolved of responsibility. Salespersons have a professional duty to advise clients on legal and ethical considerations, including fair housing laws. They cannot abdicate their responsibility by simply following a client's potentially discriminatory instructions. This approach violates the salesperson's obligation to uphold the law and ethical standards, regardless of client preferences. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive assessment of all marketing strategies through the lens of fair housing legislation. This includes considering the potential impact on all protected characteristics as defined by the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. If there is any doubt about the potential for a marketing approach to have a discriminatory effect, the salesperson should consult with their brokerage, legal counsel, or relevant regulatory bodies. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all marketing efforts are inclusive, accessible, and comply with the spirit and letter of the law.